Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time, you guys sent over a ton of stuff on JFK assassination research.
Yeah, it looks like most of it's from Fair Play.
Right, fair play.
Yeah.
And it's like this online publication
Yeah.
with articles, reader feedback, the whole nine yards.
All JFK, all the time.
Exactly. So today, we're going to be focusing on the JFK Lancer Conference,
Okay.
which was held in Dallas back in November of 1996.
Gotcha.
And our mission is to uncover some of the biggest things that came out of that.
Sounds good.
Buckle up, because this is going to be a wild ride. So first off, can you give us a little bit of context about this conference? Like, why was it so significant?
Well, I think one of the most interesting things about it was the timing. It was just a few years after the JFK Records Collection Act was passed.
Right.
So you have this huge wave of newly declassified information.
Coming out.
Exactly. So basically, researchers were just starting to dig into what this all meant.
So this conference was kind of like a chance for them to compare notes.
Yeah, and debate new theories, see where the research was going.
I can already picture it like smoke-filled rooms with like intense discussion.
Oh, absolutely. There was a buzz in the air. You could feel the excitement, the urgency. You had all these leading researchers presenting their findings, everything from the medical evidence
Wow.
to, the Zapruder
A
film.
big one.
Yeah. And of course, there were also some controversial figures there too.
Oh, really? Like who?
Like Jerry Patrick Hemming.
Oh, Patrick Hemming. Now, he was a former CIA operative, right? What did he have to say?
Well, remember, Hemming claimed to have connections to some shady figures.
Oh, yeah.
Some people suspected of being involved in the assassination,
Okay.
but his testimony was incredibly ambiguous, like really hard to pin down.
What do you mean?
Well, for instance, he talked about rolling over some individuals, but then he wouldn't give their initials.
That's pretty suspicious.
Yeah, it left a lot of people scratching their heads, like, what are they hiding?
Exactly. And speaking of hidden information, one of your sources talks about the media coverage at the time, during the anniversary.
Right.
Was there anything that you found odd about how the media was handling it?
It was strange, to be honest, because at the conference you had these deep, nuanced discussions.
Yeah.
And then you look at the Dallas media, and they're acting like they just wanted to move on.
Like it was old news.
It was almost like they were trying to sweep it under the rug.
Huh. Did you get that sense when you were being interviewed by that local reporter?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm trying to explain these really complex theories,
Right.
and they're just looking for sound bites,
Yeah.
something quick and easy for the evening news.
That must have felt kind of limiting.
Extremely. I felt like I couldn't even scratch the surface. And this whole disconnect, it was also playing out in the Dallas Morning News. They had this editorial, suggesting that Dallas needed a broader history museum
Okay.
to kind of move beyond the assassination.
Right.
But then right next to that was a letter to the editor. Uh-huh.
Demanding that the CIA be abolished.
Oh, wow. Talk about two different viewpoints.
Yeah, it really shows you the range of emotions around this whole thing.
And on a more kind of personal level, that story about Officer J.D. Tippett's widow
Yes.
receiving donations really highlights the ripple effects,
It really does. It reminds us that this wasn't just some abstract historical event. Real people were affected.
Right. Real lives were lost.
Exactly.
Okay, let's talk about one of the most controversial topics in JFK research. The idea that the Zapruder film was altered.
Yeah, that's a big one.
I mean, this film is considered to be, like, the most important piece of evidence we have, right?
For a lot of people, it is. And if it was tampered with, it really throws everything into question.
So what evidence led researchers to believe that the film might have been altered?
Well, there were a few key points presented at the conference. One argument focused on the size of the Stemmons freeway sign
Okay.
relative to the background.
In the film.
Right. Like it appeared to change size in different frames. Wait, so the sign was like growing and shrinking.
It looked that way, which, shouldn't happen unless someone was manipulating the film.
That's pretty strange.
Yeah, a lot of people thought so. And then there was the issue of the blinking red lights on the presidential limousine.
Okay.
They varied in different versions of the film, again, suggesting possible editing.
So like someone was messing with the footage.
Potentially. And perhaps even more concerning were the discrepancies with the limousine speed.
Really?
Yeah. Remember David Lifton, who wrote Best Evidence?
Yeah.
Well, he compared the Zapruder film to other films taken that day, really meticulously. And he found that the limousine was moving at different speeds.
In different films.
Yes. So that was another red flag.
It's like they were trying to control how we perceive the assassination.
Yeah, almost like manipulating the timeline of events.
Yeah. What else?
Oh, there's more. Remember Dr. Mantic?
Yeah.
Well, he pointed out this mysterious white spot in the film.
White spot.
Yeah, and it appears and disappears in different versions.
So strange.
Very strange. And then you have Jack White, who pointed out the limousine's alleged stop and this, like, white blob on JFK's head after the fatal shot.
Oh, a white blob.
It's weird. And then he also mentioned, like, the unnaturally still spectators.
So many weird details.
Hard.
I mean, if all these researchers are seeing these inconsistencies, it's hard to just ignore it.
And George Michael Edica, who was also at the conference, said it pretty definitively.
What did he say?
He said, "There's no question something is very, very wrong with the Zapruder film."
Wow, that's a pretty strong statement.
Yeah, and he wasn't the only one who felt that way.
So, if this film can't be trusted, what does that mean for our understanding of the assassination?
It's a huge question mark.
Makes you wonder what else might be out there that we don't know. Or what we think we know might not be true at all.
Absolutely.
You mentioned earlier a researcher named Nancy Wirtz
Right.
and her findings about the FBI's investigation of Ruth Paine.
Right. Ruth Paine.
She played a pretty big role in all of this, didn't she?
Yeah, she was a close friend of Marina Oswald.
Right?
And she was actually housing Marina while Oswald was in Russia.
Right.
Well, Wirtz's research revealed that the FBI was really scrutinizing Ruth and her husband, Michael.
You mean like investigating them?
Oh, yeah, big time. They looked into everything from their social circles and finances to this kind of odd cross-country trip Ruth took in '63.
Why were they so focused on her?
It's not totally clear. Some even speculated that she might have been an informant for the FBI.
Whoa, an informant?
Yeah, it's all pretty murky.
If she was an informant, you have to wonder what she knew.
Exactly.
And when.
Right. We may never know the full story.
Okay, so what else came out of this conference?
Well, there was this other researcher, Martin Shackelford,
Okay.
and his presentation, it focused on some pretty shocking revelations from recently declassified documents, specifically about the CIA's role.
Really? What did they find?
Well, for one thing, it turned out that the CIA had been monitoring Oswald before the assassination.
They knew about him beforehand.
Yep. But they didn't initially share that information with other divisions.
Wait, what? Why not?
That's the million-dollar question.
That's shady as hell.
Yeah, no kidding. And then there were these allegations that Howard Osborne from the CIA's Office of Security, he was actually the one who directed the assassination cover-up.
No way.
Yeah. Plus, the documents revealed that the CIA had been receiving information on Oswald from a source in Russia.
Hold on. So Oswald was getting information from Russia.
That's what it looks like.
That's crazy. Who was this source?
Unfortunately, the documents didn't reveal their identity.
Man, that's frustrating.
It is. And get this, there were even documents showing that Oswald had received packages from an unknown source while he was in Russia.
So even more mystery.
Oh, yeah, piles of it.
Ugh.
And to add another layer, when he returned to New Orleans, someone described as a husky laborer type ordered Oswald's anti-Castro leaflets.
Wow. This is getting more and more intriguing.
Right, it's like peeling back layers of an onion.
And each layer makes you cry a little more.
Exactly.
So what was Shackelford's overall takeaway from all this?
Well, despite all these troubling findings, he ended on a hopeful note.
Really?
He said, and I quote, "We can solve this case."
After all this time, he still believes that.
He does, and I think that's kind of inspiring, don't you?
I think you're right. It does give you a sense of hope. Well, this has been a fascinating start to our deep dive.
We've only just scratched the surface.
I can't wait to see what else we uncover. It's wild to think that while all this intense research and debate was happening at the conference, the city of Dallas itself seemed ready to move on.
Right. It was a really strange juxtaposition. You know, while I was in Dallas, I decided to walk around downtown a bit, try to get a feel for the city beyond Dealey Plaza.
Oh, cool. What was it like?
Well, I ended up at the Dallas Convention Center, this massive modern building.
Oh, yeah, I know that place.
It felt like a world away from the historic sites.
So it was like seeing two different sides of Dallas. One wrestling with the past, and the other looking towards the future.
Exactly. And, you know, inside the convention center, I saw a group of teenagers setting up for some event.
Okay.
They were laughing, joking around.
Just being kids.
Right. And totally oblivious to the weight of history hanging over the city.
It's interesting how life just goes on, isn't it? Even in the shadow of tragedy.
Yeah, for sure.
It's good to be reminded that Dallas is more than just Dealey Plaza.
Definitely.
Okay, well, let's get back to that energy at the conference. I remember from your notes, there was one presentation that stood out to you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This researcher, Anna Marie Coons-Walko, she presented some really fascinating stuff about Roger Craig, Rose Cheramy, and even more on the Zapruder film.
Okay, wow. Let's start with Roger Craig. He was a Dallas County Sheriff's deputy, right?
Right. And he was in Dealey Plaza during the assassination.
What did he say happened?
Well, Craig claimed he saw a man running from the Texas school book depository, like right after the shooting.
So someone besides Oswald.
Potentially. He said the man ran down to Elm Street and jumped into this Rambler station wagon.
A getaway car.
Could be. And the driver, Craig, described him as having darker skin.
Okay, so if this is true, that really challenges the whole lone gunman idea, doesn't it?
For sure. Now, the Warren Commission, they totally dismissed Craig's story.
Of course they did.
But Coons-Walko presented some pretty compelling evidence to support it.
Like what?
Well, there's this photograph taken by a news photographer right after the shooting, and it shows Craig standing on Elm Street looking towards the depository.
Okay.
And if you look really closely at the background, you can see this tiny figure running away from the building.
Wait, so there's photographic evidence to back up Craig's story.
It seems that way.
Man, it just makes you wonder why the Warren Commission was so quick to dismiss him.
Right.
Okay, so then what about this Rose Cheramy? You said she claimed to have information about a plot to kill Kennedy.
Yeah, but she had this history of mental illness.
So people didn't take her seriously.
Right. But Coons-Walko, she found some interesting documents.
What kind of documents?
Well, they showed that Cheramy had been hospitalized for a severe beating just days before the assassination.
Whoa, a beating?
Yeah, and Cheramy claimed she was attacked by people involved in the plot.
To keep her quiet.
Exactly.
That's terrifying.
It is, and it suggests that she was considered a real threat.
So did she ever try to warn anyone about the assassination?
Well, there's some evidence that she did contact law enforcement before it happened.
And they ignored her.
It seems so.
Tragic.
It really is.
It's like sometimes the most unlikely sources have the most crucial information.
That's a good point.
Okay, so what did Coons-Walko have to say about the Zapruder film? I know we've already talked about alterations.
Right. Well, in addition to that, she presented some documents that suggested the film might have been suppressed.
Suppressed, what do you mean?
Like kept from being shown to anyone outside the government?
So they were trying to control access to it. What were they so afraid of?
Who knows? But Coons-Walko, she actually got to view a version of the film that was released from FBI field office files back in '94.
Oh, wow.
And she said it was so much clearer and more complete than the one everyone's seen.
And what happened to it?
It was later deemed damaged and is no longer available.
Come on. That's so frustrating.
It is.
Okay, let's move on to Martin Shackelford's presentation. He talked about newly declassified documents as well, right? Specifically regarding the CIA.
Yes. His research was really revealing. It suggested the CIA was way more involved with Oswald than they initially admitted.
We touched on that a bit before. But what else did they find?
Well, one thing that was really striking was that the CIA was monitoring Oswald before the assassination.
Right, we talked about that.
But they withheld that information from other agencies.
Which is still so bizarre to me.
Right.
What was their reasoning for that?
Your guess is as good as mine. But the documents also showed that the CIA was receiving information on Oswald from a source inside Russia.
So they were in communication.
It seems that way.
It just makes you wonder about Oswald's role in all of this. Was he a double agent? Was the CIA manipulating him?
Yeah, the possibilities are pretty mind-boggling.
Like something out of a spy novel.
Exactly. And there was also some new information about George de Mohrenschildt. Do you remember him?
Oh, yeah, the
Yeah.
guy who befriended Oswald and Marina in Dallas.
Right. Well, the documents showed that he had connections to both the CIA and Lyndon Johnson's financial backers.
De Mohrenschildt, always such a shadowy figure.
Oh, right.
And then he conveniently dies under mysterious circumstances before he can testify before Congress.
It's all very suspicious.
It's like every time we uncover one piece of the puzzle, it just creates more questions.
It does.
So Shackelford's research, it really highlighted this like web of intelligence agencies and hidden agendas.
Right.
It suggests a much darker and more complex truth than the official narrative.
For sure. It makes you wonder who is really pulling the strings.
Exactly. It's clear we still have a lot to uncover. You mentioned visiting Dealey Plaza and the sixth floor museum. What was it like to actually be there? at the site of the assassination.
It was really powerful, to be honest. Just walking through Dealey Plaza, seeing the grassy knoll, the picket fence, the Texas School Book Depository, it was like stepping back in time.
I can only imagine. I bet you felt the weight of history there.
Oh, absolutely. You could feel it in the air. And then, standing in the sixth-floor window, that was something else.
The place where Oswald allegedly fired the shots.
Yeah. I was surprised by how emotional I felt. It was just this wave of sadness, thinking about how quickly life can be taken away and how much potential was lost that day. You can't help but think about what might have been if Kennedy had lived.
It's a heavy thought. Did you take any pictures while you were there?
It was such a dilemma. On the one hand, I wanted to document my visit. It felt important.
Yeah, again.
But then on the other hand, it felt kind of disrespectful, like I was reducing this momentous event to a tourist attraction. I just didn't want to exploit the tragedy for a selfie. You know what I mean?
I do. It's tough to find that balance.
It is. But, standing there, I thought about all the other people who visited that spot. The tourists, the researchers, the mourners.
All drawn to this place for their own reasons.
Exactly. All seeking some kind of connection to history, some way to make sense of this senseless act.
It's a reminder that this wasn't just a historical event. It was a deeply personal experience for so many people.
Absolutely.
And it still resonates today.
It does.
You also mentioned that the media played a big role in how the assassination was portrayed, both initially and in the years that followed.
Yeah, they were instrumental in shaping public perception. From the breaking news reports to the in-depth investigations, they helped create the story of what happened.
But you found that this story wasn't always accurate or complete.
Unfortunately, no. I found a lot of examples of bias, censorship, even manipulation in the coverage.
Wow, so some people were actively trying to control the narrative.
It seems that way.
What were their motives?
Well, I think some powerful interests were definitely trying to protect themselves and to shape the public's perception of the event.
Can you give me an example of that?
Think about how Lee Harvey Oswald was portrayed in the media. He was immediately labeled the lone gunman, and his past, it was scrutinized and presented in a way that made him seem like a deranged loner.
A perfect villain.
Exactly. And the media often just accepted the Warren Commission's findings without question.
So they were complicit in the cover-up.
I don't know about complicit. I think some journalists genuinely believed what they were reporting.
Okay.
But I think others, they were definitely influenced by government pressure or their own biases even.
Right. It's a reminder that we should always be critical of the information we consume, especially when it comes from sources that have a vested interest.
That's a good point. We can't just passively absorb what we're told. We have to be active participants, questioning what we see and hear.
And seeking out diverse perspectives. Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the Assassination Records Review Board.
Okay.
This was created in the 90s to oversee the release of classified documents related to the assassination, right?
Right. And it was a huge step forward for transparency and accountability. For the first time, an independent body had the power to review and release government documents related to a presidential assassination.
But they faced a lot of pushback, didn't they?
Oh, yeah, for sure. A lot of government agencies were really reluctant to release sensitive information.
Why?
They argued it would jeopardize national security or violate privacy rights.
So even with the legal authority, they still had to deal with all the bureaucracy and political pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. And they had a limited amount of time to review mountains of documents.
That must have been overwhelming.
It was.
But despite the challenges, they still managed to release a significant number of documents.
They did.
So what were some of the biggest revelations?
Well, we talked about how the CIA was monitoring Oswald prior to the assassination, right? And how they withheld that information.
Yeah.
But the documents also revealed that the CIA had destroyed evidence related to the assassination.
Wait, they destroyed evidence?
That's what the documents show.
That's outrageous.
Yeah.
Did the documents reveal anything about Oswald's motives? Or his connections?
Well, there were some interesting findings about his trip to Mexico City just weeks before the assassination.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading about that.
The documents showed that he met with Cuban and Soviet officials there.
So he was definitely up to something.
Right. And there was also speculation that he might have been trying to get a visa to travel to Cuba.
Interesting. So he was clearly involved in some pretty shady activities. But the question remains, was he acting alone? Or was he part of something bigger?
Right. That's the million-dollar question. And the documents from the Assassination Records Review Board, they provided some valuable insights, but ultimately they raised more questions than they answered.
And I guess that's what keeps us all coming back. That desire to know the truth. You know, you've talked a lot about your own research into the assassination. You started with this casual interest, but it quickly became an obsession.
It did.
What was it that pulled you in so deeply?
I think it was a few things. I mean, obviously, the historical significance of the event is huge, but then you have all these conflicting accounts, the unanswered questions. It just creates this sense of mystery.
Yeah, I get that. Mysteries are hard to resist.
Right. And as I delved deeper, I realized it wasn't just an abstract historical event. It was a deeply personal experience for millions of people.
Of course.
And it continues to affect us today. I started connecting with the stories of the witnesses, the investigators, the family members. Their pain, their confusion, their desire for answers, it really brought the event to life for me.
It sounds like your research became very personal. It was more than just intellectual curiosity.
It was.
Yeah.
And the more I learned, the more convinced I became that the government wasn't telling the whole story.
That's a common experience for people who research the assassination.
Yeah.
The more you learn, the more you realize how much we still don't know.
Exactly. And that's what keeps so many of us hooked.
That search for the truth.
Right.
Now, with all the research you've done, what are some of the most compelling pieces of evidence you've encountered? I know you've mentioned the witness testimonies, the analysis of the Zapruder film, and all those declassified documents.
Right. Well, with the witness testimonies, you have all these people sharing accounts that just contradict the official narrative. They described things that couldn't be explained by the lone gunman theory.
Like what?
Well, some witnesses described seeing puffs of smoke coming from the grassy knoll.
Really?
Yeah. Others described seeing men in suits fleeing the scene right after the shooting.
Okay.
And then there was this whole thing about a mysterious woman with an umbrella who seemed to be signaling to someone.
A woman with an umbrella.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. But all these details, they suggest the possibility of multiple shooters.
And maybe even a coordinated effort.
Right.
Okay, what about the Zapruder film?
Well, experts who analyzed it frame by frame, they found all sorts of anomalies.
Anomalies? Like what?
Well, for example, the limousine appears to be moving at impossible speeds. The president's head is positioned differently in various frames. Objects appear and disappear in the background.
It's almost like someone was manipulating reality.
Right.
Okay, then there are those documents we talked about, the ones released by the Assassination Records Review Board.
Yeah, those were huge. They revealed that the CIA and the FBI were monitoring Oswald before the assassination.
Right.
And they showed that both agencies withheld information from the Warren Commission and even destroyed evidence.
Okay, that is pretty damning.
Right. It suggests a level of government involvement that was never publicly acknowledged.
And then there's all the information about Oswald's trip to Mexico City, his meetings with Cuban and Soviet officials, his possible attempts to get a visa to Cuba.
Yeah, all those things just add another layer of intrigue to the story.
Again, it makes you wonder. Lone wolf.
Hmm.
Or pawn in a much larger game.
Exactly.
And I guess that's the question that will continue to haunt us.
Probably. But even without definitive answers, the search itself is fascinating.
I think you're right. Okay, we've talked a lot about the more factual side of your research, but I'm also curious about the personal impact it's had on you. You've mentioned that this whole journey has been pretty transformative. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's definitely challenged my assumptions about history and power, even truth, to be honest.
How so?
Well, I'm definitely more skeptical of official narratives now, more aware of the agendas that shape events, and I'm much more determined to find the truth, no matter how difficult it might be.
So are you saying this whole thing has turned you into a conspiracy theorist?
Huh, not quite. I still value evidence-based reasoning.
Okay, good.
But I'm also more open to the possibility that things aren't always what they seem, that there are forces at work in the world that we don't fully understand.
I think that's healthy.
Yeah, I think so too. And my research has also made me more aware of the fragility of life, you know? It's a reminder to appreciate our loved ones, to cherish every moment, and not take anything for granted.
That's a good takeaway. Life is short and precious.
It is. And you know, this whole experience has also made me really appreciate the freedoms we have in a democratic society.
How so?
Well, even in the face of this tragedy, the peaceful transfer of power continued. Our institutions held. It's a reminder that democracy is fragile, something we should never take for granted.
That's an important point. Democracy isn't a given.
Exactly.
Okay, so for someone who wants to learn more about the JFK assassination, where do you recommend they start?
Well, I always recommend the Sixth Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza.
Yeah.
It's really well done. They have a ton of artifacts and documents, and it gives you a really good overview of the assassination and its aftermath.
Okay, so that's a good starting point. What else?
Well, the National Archives and Records Administration, or NARA, they have a vast collection of documents related to the assassination.
Right, I've spent a lot of time on their website.
It's a treasure trove.
It is.
And of course, there are countless books and films on the subject.
Oh, yeah. Any documentaries you'd recommend?
A few that come to mind are The Men Who Killed Kennedy, JFK, The Smoking Gun, and Cold Case JFK.
I've heard of those, but I haven't seen them.
They each offer different theories and interpretations, so it's good to get a range of perspectives.
Makes sense.
And there are also tons of websites dedicated to the assassination, like the Mary Farrell Foundation website and the JFK Lancer website.
Yeah, the internet has really opened up a whole new world of information.
It has, and it's made research much more accessible. Anyone with an internet connection can contribute to the search for truth.
I love that. Okay, last question. After all your research, do you believe Oswald acted alone? Or was there a conspiracy?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, after all these years, I still can't say for sure.
So you're undecided.
Not necessarily. I just try to stay open to all possibilities. I'm willing to consider any theory as long as there's evidence. But I also try to be aware of my own biases, you know?
Right, you don't want to fall into the trap of confirmation bias.
Exactly. I think the most important thing is to keep asking questions, to keep searching for the truth, to never give up hope that we might one day understand what really happened.
Well said. The JFK assassination, it's a wound that may never fully heal. But the search for truth, for understanding, that's a journey worth taking.
I agree.
And it's a journey we need to take together.
Absolutely. You know, it's amazing to think about how the JFK assassination still has such a hold on us, even after all these years.
It really does. It's like this one event just kind of cracked the foundation of our reality.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't just a tragedy. It was like this cultural earthquake.
Right.
It shifted everything.
And we see that reflected in all the ways it's been portrayed, reinterpreted in pop culture.
Yeah.
We've talked about some of the books, the films, but you mentioned some documentaries earlier too. Some fact-based, some more speculative.
Right.
Can you give me some examples?
Sure. One that always comes up is The Men Who Killed Kennedy.
Okay.
It's a series, actually, and it's very critical of the official narrative.
So it's definitely in the conspiracy theory camp.
Oh, yeah. Definitely. It explores all sorts of theories and basically suggests that powerful forces were behind the assassination.
I see. It sounds pretty intense.
It is. It's been pretty controversial, actually.
But worth watching.
If you're interested in those alternative explanations, absolutely.
Okay. What about documentaries that take a more balanced approach?
JFK, The Smoking Gun. That's a good one.
Okay.
It focuses on the forensic evidence, presents this theory about a second shooter on the grassy knoll.
Interesting.
So it's still challenging the lone gunman theory, but it's grounded in science.
Right. So a more evidence-based approach.
Exactly. And then there's Cold Case JFK.
I've heard of that one.
It uses all these modern forensic techniques to re-examine the evidence. It's like watching a CSI episode about the assassination.
I love that. Okay, yeah, that one's definitely going on my list. Speaking of forensic techniques, you mentioned some technological advancements that are being used to analyze the evidence now.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what kind of things are we talking about?
Well, for instance, ballistics analysis.
Okay.
It's gotten so much more sophisticated.
Right.
Researchers can actually re-examine bullet trajectories
Wow.
and potentially figure out how many shooters there were. And then you have image enhancement techniques. You can pull out details from photos and films that you couldn't see before.
So are we getting closer to the truth because of technology?
I think in some ways, yes. But we always have to be careful about over-interpreting the results.
Right, not getting ahead of ourselves.
Exactly.
Okay. And you also mentioned increased international collaboration in JFK research.
Yes. It's really encouraging, actually. Researchers from all over the world are starting to work together more.
That's fantastic.
Sharing information, comparing notes, really breaking down those old barriers.
I bet that's essential when you're dealing with an event that had global implications.
No, absolutely. The JFK assassination, it wasn't just an American tragedy. It had repercussions everywhere.
It reminds us that we're all interconnected, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And as we keep searching for answers, it's important to remember that we're not just uncovering facts about the past, we're also asking bigger questions about power, secrecy,
Wow.
the very structure of our society.
It's a mirror.
It is.
It forces us to look at ourselves.
And that's a good thing.
Okay, well, we've covered a lot of ground today. A lot to think about.
We have.
Conflicting evidence, government secrecy, witness accounts, expert opinions. But the mystery, it remains.
Yeah.
Where will you go from here with your research?
Well, I think the search for truth is a never-ending journey, and I'm not planning to stop anytime soon.
That's the spirit. And that's where we'll leave our listeners today. But remember, the JFK assassination isn't just some historical event. It's a puzzle that continues to fascinate and challenge us. And we encourage all of you to keep questioning, keep exploring, keep searching for the truth.
Well said. And as we close out this deep dive, I wanted to leave you with a quote from JFK himself. He said, "The great enemy of truth is very often not the lie deliberate, contrived, and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic."
That's powerful.
Let's all strive to be truth seekers, to challenge myths, and to never stop questioning the official narrative.
Wise words. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into JFK assassination research.
Thank you.
Until next time, keep those minds curious.